Today I want to talk about the predicament of black boys being overdiagnosed with learning disabilities that they do not have and being placed in special education that they do not need. For those who don't know, historically, special education was started with Public Law 94-142 being passed by the United States Congress in 1975. Public Law 94-142 was designed to make sure children with disabilities received a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Prior to the passage of PL 94-142, a child with a learning challenge, be it deafness, blindness, or anything else, could be told to stay home. A school in many states could simply tell parents, we are not properly prepared and resourced to educate your child, so they need to stay at home with you. But in 1975, all that changed with the official birth of what we now call special education. Special education, although it can be good in many instances, can also be very, very bad and detrimental in other instances. As African people, we have to be crystal clear in understanding that just because a certain law was passed with positive intent, that same law can be used disproportionately against black people with negative intent. And that's exactly what has happened with special education. Special education has become a dumping ground for black boys who teachers do not want in their classrooms. Yes, many of those teachers are white. But I would also say that many of those teachers just are as black as you or I. I struggle daily fighting to keep our boys out of special ed who do not need it, and fighting to get our boys in special ed who actually do need it, because there are educators and principals who could care less about the learning needs of the child and who are only interested in making sure that they have the most comfortable learning environment imaginable in their school. There are 13 special education classifications, categories, or diagnoses, depending on whatever term you want to use. One is mental retardation. Another is autism. We have specific learning disability. We have emotional disturbance. We have deafness. We have blindness. We have deafness with blindness. We have traumatic brain injury. We have orthopedic impairment. We have traumatic brain injury, which I think I may have said. Other health impairment. In some states like Pennsylvania, you actually have the hearing impairment, and you also have the developmental delay, which in many states you no longer use as a diagnosis once the child begins school. It's simply used during the preschool years. Now, let's look at the big black five. What are the big black five? The big black five are the 5 major diagnoses, or should I say the most prevalent, the diagnoses that I find in my professional work and that we tend to find in the special ed and psychological literature, that tend to represent the gross amount of black kids who are put in special education. Of the 13, the big black 5 are learning disability, emotional disturbance, mental retardation, autism, and other health impairment, which is a title given to a child with an outside medical problem that is adversely impacting their ability to learn in school. Now, with mental retardation, I'm finding that too many black boys are being diagnosed with retardation that they don't have because the evaluator is looking exclusively at an IQ score. And they are not interpreting the entire intellectual profile that probably would have demonstrated that although the child's overall full-scale IQ score was below 70, which is the general cutoff when we start looking at intellectual deficiencies, but despite the fact that the child's overall IQ score was not below 70, or was below 70, that the profile can still indicate that this is a child who may not be retarded. So if there's any parents out there who suspect that your black boy may have been diagnosed with retardation that they do not have, I want you to look at the school psychological evaluation report and first see whether or not the child's IQ score was below 70. And if it was, you then want to look at the pattern of scores that are represented in the child's intellectual profile. For example, their working memory IQ score, was that also below 70? Their verbal ability score, was that below 70? Their working memory or mental processing speed IQ score, was that below 70? My point is, if the index scores were not below 70, or should I say if only one or two of them was below 70, which means it drastically affected the overall IQ score, then that overall IQ score is no longer interpretable. You cannot interpret an overall IQ score when there is significant scatter on the intellectual profile. That means if there are very high scores and then very low scores, okay, you can interpret that profile. So what's very important for us to know and to understand is that an IQ score by itself does not render you retarded, just like an IQ score by itself doesn't automatically render you as someone without mental giftedness. Now, the other thing you want to look at when you're evaluating for intelligence is whether or not the child's adaptive behavioral scores are impaired. What is adaptive behavior? Adaptive behavior is how well a child can take care of himself, communicate with others, function in school, navigate the neighborhood, hold a job, and function in life as well as most other children the same age or in the same grade. If the child can carry on intellectually in life outside of the classroom as well as most other students, then guess what? That sounds like somebody who's not retarded. You must first have an IQ score below 70. That is valid. The score must be valid, which is why I want you to look for the peaks and valleys, because if there's too many peaks and valleys on your child's intellectual profile, they may not be retarded. And then you want to look to see if your child has an impairment in adaptive behavior. And if neither one of those situations are present, your child can't possibly be retarded. And if one of those are not present, there's a likelihood that your child may have been misdiagnosed. But in addition to mental retardation is emotional disturbance, which I find to be such a despicable diagnosis. I do give it because some children meet it, but I also find that sometimes it is applied judiciously and unjudiciously in cases where it shouldn't have been given. An emotional disturbance is the failure on part of a child to build and maintain relationships with teachers and peers, a pattern of depression or sadness associated with being in school, fears associated with being in school, and abnormal behaviors under normal circumstances. That can represent almost anything at any time. And it's very important that we make sure, okay, that a child isn't diagnosed with that ED if they absolutely do not have that problem. We're going to talk more about special ed, but this is a good intro for you, and I'll be back soon.